Let's start with Mourinho. He's out at Roma after 2.5 years, and obviously, whether it's Tottenham before that or Manchester United before that, there always seems to be, by the third year, a bit of a problem. We're going to look forward before we look back. And Shaka, I'll start with you, because the bookies have Newcastle as the favorite for where he goes next. I know you're excited about that, right? You're hoping it happens?
No, not at all. Not in the slightest, Dalen. Listen, I first of all, I don't think Eddie Howe has done anything to warrant this kind of speculation. I don't think Jose Mourinho could have taken Newcastle from where they were when Eddie Howe took over to certainly the accomplishments of last season, finishing top 4 and 1 cup final appearance. Now, this season has been a little bit disappointing, but I think that's because of injuries. So just to start, I think Eddie Howe deserves a longer tenure than this, and to get this train back on track. Secondly, Jose Mourinho, just in terms of style of football, is not something I've ever warmed to. Jose Mourinho, by all accounts, brings silverware and not much else. If that's your only focus, then he's your manager. But you look at his last 2 jobs: Roma, okay, Europa Conference League apart; Spurs, you got them to a cup final, but they didn't see that job through. There was no silverware, so I'm not sure there's an awful lot to boast of. So I just feel that in that regard, maybe Mourinho's light is dimming as well. And furthermore, from a Newcastle perspective, Newcastle have tried this, and aging manager who had unprecedented success, and didn't really pan out. Rafa Benitez came to Newcastle and was, by expected standards, an abject failure. So I'm not sure that Newcastle want to test history again.
Augie, what are your thoughts on this? Are the bookies just off? Does this seem like an obvious link, so he's the favorite there, or is this something, anything to this?
No, I think it's a bit knee-jerk. I think they've just basically thought that Eddie Howe's under pressure, Newcastle run by Saudi Arabia, ambition, want to make a splash. But, the reality is that when he was sat yesterday, I just thought back to that night at Old Trafford when he sprinted down the touchline after Porto got that really late, winner against United. He announced himself onto the world stage. That was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then he became the special one. He had his press conference at Chelsea. I'm the special one. And for about 4 or 5 years, he really was. He really was the biggest name in football. He was, at that point, bigger than Ronaldo, bigger than Messi, bigger than Sir Alex Ferguson. He was everything. He dominated the stage. He was brilliant as a coach. He was brilliant as a speaker, as a motivator. He was the man. But like I said, that was 20 years ago. You could argue that for the last 10 years, he's been yesterday's man. And I think that's quite sad. But, certainly Real Madrid onwards, his career has been a downward spiral, really. And all of his jobs have ended with acrimony, with the players that wanted him there. Maybe a little bit differently wrong, but still, they've not ended well. And I think you look at Mourinho as a coach, his style of management is now outdated. Not just with the players. I think we have to look at the modern game now. It's a game where, clubs want their teams to play stylish football, the Pep Guardiola way, rightly or wrongly. But also most big clubs are now run with the situation where they have a hierarchy of owner, sporting director, coach. Jose has never been comfortable working with a sporting director. He really is that. He's almost like the last of the old breed of managers that wanted to control everything. And he doesn't really fit in anymore. He doesn't fit into the modern way of coaching, and his football doesn't fit in. His management upstairs, I guess, with the hierarchy doesn't fit in. So the Newcastle link for me, like Shaka said, Eddie Howe, he's had a really bad injury list. They were very close to getting a point off Man City at the weekend. It doesn't look great right now if you look at the run of results, but if you look at the deeper context, he's actually done a good job at Newcastle. So the Mourinho thing for me, it's a non-starter at Newcastle, total non-starter.
Let's dive into Mourinho, because you touched on some of the managerial tactics that may be outdated. I mean, he has Shaka, you said this too. Mourinho, maybe one of his greatest gifts is branding. He branded himself the special one. He's constantly associated himself with winning trophies. Now, the trophies most recently was the Europa Conference League, as you said, which was a trophy that didn't exist 5 years ago because who cared? Like it's not competing for the Champions League, which he once was, or even the Europa League. It's the third tier. Why is he fallen off, if you will, Shaq? Is it tactics? Is it man management? Is it everything? Or has the game passed him by? Is he capable of succeeding like he once was?
Look, I think there's a sell-by date to everything in today's game, and managers are absolutely no different. I think players are looking for a different type of management style. They don't respond to certainly what you saw at Manchester United, being called out publicly in the way that many of those players were. And once one player turns, once that dressing room starts to go, it's really difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. So a lot of things I think went against Mourinho. I also feel that the game as a both from a playing perspective and from a fan's perspective, it's progressed. And while yes, he had a lot of success at Chelsea. Chelsea were desperate for silverware, and almost the playing style didn't matter. More and more clubs are wanting to recognize, wanting to have that their playing traditions be a part of who they are, a part of their identity. He goes to Spurs. Spurs have branded themselves through history about playing the game a certain way, and Mourinho was not that. So once that silverware doesn't, and listen, it's hard to win trophies, but once that escapes you, then you're left with absolutely nothing to claim as a fallback. And I think that's where Mourinho got caught out. And also I go back to his spell at Manchester United. And while he brought silverware, and you mentioned him a master of branding, he spoke about winning a treble at Manchester United, which was just bizarre for people like me who remember Manchester United winning trebles. The Community Shield, the Europa League, and the League Cup is not a treble Manchester United boast of. But all of a sudden, that became their new normal. The bar was lowered significantly. And I just feel, in a broader picture, people aren't falling for that in the same way.
I feel like a lot of times when I host a show with you guys, obviously I'm American, I have American sports context to things. And whether it's the NFL, which the game has developed a lot in 10 years, old defensive coaches had to change. They had to. Bill Belichick, who just famously, stepped away from, was parted ways. He didn't change that much, and he even got left behind. Whether it's Mike Krzyzewski at Duke and college basketball, everybody's got to adapt to different landscape. And changing sports have changed here drastically, just like global football has changed drastically in the last decade. Mark, is Mourinho unwilling or unable to adapt? Because it seems like you have to change with the times, otherwise you will get left behind.
Maybe it's a bit of both. I mean, you could argue that his kind of decline began when he went head-to-head with Pep Guardiola in Spain with Real and Barcelona, and that really kind of, Pep was a new guy, wasn't he? Pep was the guy that had the new idea, and Mourinho's tactics didn't work against Guardiola, not to a long-term extent, because obviously Barca became the very dominant team, and Jose hasn't really changed since then. Jose's DNA basically is older, experienced players that he can rely upon and a big centre forward, and that is basically, in a nutshell, what Mourinho does. That isn't the way that the game's played anymore. And it's about fluidity. It's about younger players, promising players, and Jose leaves behind when he goes generally an old squad and an expensive squad, and the game has moved on. So I don't think he can change. No, and I think even Sir Alex Ferguson changed. He was always changing his coaches, changing his mentality, but ultimately the game caught him up. And I think it's a really interesting point you make, Dalen, about how the very greatest have ultimately get caught up with the times. At some point it will happen to Pep Guardiola. I can't think when, but that'd be fascinating, because when that happens, that will be the next wave of, how the game changes really, and we haven't seen it yet. But Jose was washed away by it, and what happens next and where he goes next is a big question, because I don't really see him heading to one of the big 5 leagues in Europe anymore.
Okay, well, let's talk about that then. And Mark, I'll stay with you, and then Shaq, you tag on. What would be a fit for him? Because owners may still be interested, given his success in the past, which doesn't indicate future success, as we're touching on. Or national teams may be interested. Do you see a potential landing spot for him somewhere?
I think this might surprise people, that he'll take a bit of a pause. There'll be nothing in Europe that really appeals to him, because he's done all the big clubs, he's done all the big jobs, and he's not going to get that offer anymore. He's going to get a mid-ranking team, and that isn't Jose Mourinho. I think, having covered Man United when he was there and spent a couple of summers in the US with him, he absolutely loves Los Angeles. He would always he would insist that the clubs that he coached use UCLA's facilities, because UCLA's facilities are amazing, the world-class facilities. And Jose always wanted to be there. He loved being in LA. So Jose Mourinho for MLS might actually be a thing if either the LA clubs, LAFC or Galaxy, were to be ambitious enough to say, Jose, would you come to MLS? I think it's something he'd consider, because look, we know he loves the celebrity. What a place to be. Jose Mourinho in Hollywood would be great. But I think he needs a new challenge now, but a challenge that isn't going to be difficult for him. If he went to MLS, he would be, box office news, front page news, and all the major, broadcasters, and he would love that. Goes to Europe, ain't going to happen. Saudi Arabia, yeah, it's okay for the money, but as we've seen with Jordan Henderson leaving Saudi Arabia and rumours about Benzema and Roberto Firmino, players and coaches aren't really happy there. So I think Jose could take a bit of a step back and think if there's an opportunity in the MLS, especially if it's in LA, he'd take it.
Okay, LAFC just was in the MLS Cup, and they have Steve Cherundolo, who's, at least for American soccer fans, one of the best guys we've ever had, at least on the left flank and running up and down the field. And then Greg Vanny, who came from Toronto, is at LA Galaxy. But yeah, maybe somebody would make a move here. Shaka, what do you see as a potential landing spot for him, whether national team or club level?
My initial reaction was Saudi Arabia. I think he's exactly the kind of manager that they would want out there. High profile, would bring added eyeballs to that league, that maybe in a way that some of the players, even big name players like Benzema, simply have not done. So and they certainly could afford him, and given the paycheck that he would command. Because I just don't see any big club in Europe taking that chance with Jose Mourinho again. We had Gabriel Marcotti on the show last night, and of course a natural fit would be the Portuguese national team. Jose Mourinho is a knockout type tournament manager, and so that the shorter format of international football may very well suit Jose Mourinho. But of course, there's the small issue of Cristiano Ronaldo and their kind of acrimonious relationship, certainly in Madrid, and Ronaldo's continuing to play, and he's going to dictate when he steps down. So I see a huge clash of personalities there, with only, certainly for the time being, Ronaldo winning. So maybe if Ronaldo decides to call it a day himself, that might be a good fit for Jose Mourinho. Otherwise, I'm just really not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Go, Mark.
The Portugal situation has always been an intriguing one. It's always been suggested that ultimately he will manage Portugal, but you look at the squad they've got. That isn't a Jose Mourinho squad. Bernardo Silva, Diogo Jota, Ronaldo, as we know. All these flair players, I don't see how Mourinho takes that team on and makes them any better. He wouldn't be able to work with those players. They're frustrated. They're a great set of players, but they wouldn't fit the way that Jose works. So I just don't see that being an option. So I think MLS is... It's less likely than likely, but I do think it's something worth considering because of the unique pull of certain places, New York, LA, Jose's taste for celebrity. I don't see an international job appealing. England has been mentioned in the past, but again, that squad that has been built by Gareth Southgate is not a Jose Mourinho squad. Obviously, would love to have Harry Kane in his team, but again, that team is, people like Phil Foden, Bukayo Saka. These are great flair players. So, and the English FA, probably wouldn't want to pay whatever Jose Mourinho wanted. So he's really got to take a step back and think, what next? What next?
Yeah, and he's 60 years old too, so it's not like we mentioned it 20 years ago when he was the young kind of growing manager. This is kind of later in his career. It'll be interesting if he comes to MLS. I don't know what he's going to say to get on the front pages and like lead Sports Center like Messi is going to do, but I'd like to find out. Who knows what he would throw out there.
He would definitely be there. He would have a stack of things to say. Don't worry about that.